The chemicals are the first thing that hits you. It's not the smell of death, though that's always lingering in the background like a foul ghost. No, it's the bleach, the ammonia, and the industrial grade enzymes we use to dissolve what's left behind. My name is Elias. I've been a crime scene cleaner for 12 years. I don't say that to brag. It's a dirty, thankless, soul-eroding job that most people couldn't handle for 12 minutes, let alone 12 years. You see things that stay with you. You see the way a human body looks when it's been sitting in a bathtub for 3 weeks in the height of a humid July. You see the way a person's entire life can be reduced to a dark, sticky Rorschach test on a hardwood floor. I work for a company called Pristine Transitions. We're the ones the police call when the yellow tape comes down. We're the ones the families hire when they can't bear to look at the room where their loved one took their last breath. It's procedural, it's professional, but mostly, it's quiet. That's why I like it. People think the dead are loud, that they leave behind echoes and screams. They don't. They leave behind silence and a mess that needs scrubbing. Or at least, that's what I thought until last Tuesday. It started with a call from my supervisor, Miller, at 2 a.m. That's never a good sign. Usually the late-night call are high-profile, messy ones, multi-car pileups or industrial accidents. Miller's voice sounded different this time. It wasn't the usual gruff, caffeine-deprived bark. It was flat, dot empty. He gave me an address in a part of the city I didn't recognize, a suburb that seemed to have been swallowed by the encroaching woods. He told me the contract was specialized. In our world, that's code for high-paying and don't ask questions. I pulled up to the house just as the moon was bent to dip behind the tree line. It was a Victorian, or it used to be. Now it was just a skeletal remains of a building, wrapped in ivy that looked more like strangling hands than decoration. The fog was thick, rolling off the damp earth and clinging to my boots as I hopped out of the van. I grabbed my gear. Heavy-duty vacuums, the sprayers, the PPE suits that make you look like an astronaut heading for a very depressing moon. I walked around the perimeter of the house, looking for the entrance. Standard procedure. You find the door, you check the seal, you suit up. But as I circled the building, something felt wrong. I walked the full length of the porch. No door. I walked to the back, past the overgrown garden. No door. I checked the sides, pushing back the thick, waxy ivy. Nothing. No front door, no back door, no cellar hatch, not even a doggy door. Just solid, weathered wood and stained glassed windows that were positioned way too high to see through. I stood there for a minute, the cold air biting at my neck, wondering if Miller had given me the wrong address. But the work order was clear. The Blackwood Residence. This was it. I took a flashlight from my belt and shone it along the walls. The construction was seamless. There were no seams where a door might have been boarded up. It was as if the house had been grown as a single, solid shell. I was about to call Miller to tell him his specialized job was a joke when I saw the ladder, that it was tucked behind a massive oak tree, leading up to one of those high, narrow windows on the second floor. A small piece of yellow police tape was fluttering from the bottom rug. This was the way in. I don't like heights, especially not when I'm hauling 40 pounds of cleaning supplies, but a job is a job. I climbed. The wood of the house felt strange under my gloves. Too warm, almost like it was vibrating. I reached the window. It wasn't locked. In fact, it didn't even have a latch. It just slid open with a hiss like air escaping a pressurized cabin. I tumbled inside, hitting a plush carpet that smelled of old roses and iron. I clicked on my industrial floodlight, and the room jumped into focus. It was a bedroom, immaculate. Lace doilies on the nightstands, a heavy quilt on the bed, and a thick layer of dust over everything. But in the center of the room, there was the mess. A massive, dark saturation stain. It wasn't just on the carpet. It looked like it had been sprayed upward, coating the underside of a crystal chandelier that hung from the ceiling. I've seen enough blood to know that this wasn't a natural death. This was a rupture. I knelt down, clicking my respirator into place. The air in here was heavy, stagnant. I reached for my enzymatic spray, but my hand stopped midair. I looked around the room again. There was a bed, a wardrobe, 2 nightstands, and a vanity. But there were no doors. Not just to the outside. There were no doors to a hallway, no doors to a closet, no doors to a bathroom. I was in a room that was a box. A perfect sealed box with a single window 15 feet off the ground. My heart gave a little thud against my ribs. Claustrophobia is a luxury you can't afford in this business, so I pushed it down. I told myself the door was probably hidden behind the wardrobe. People do weird things with architecture. I started to work, spray, soak, scrub. The rhythm usually calms me. But as the enzymes began to eat away at the stain, the smell changed. It didn't smell like copper and decay. It smelled like ozone, like the air right before a massive lightning strike. And then there were the sounds. At first, I thought it was the house settling. Old Victorians groan. They have character. But this wasn't a groan. It was a rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from inside the walls. I stopped scrubbing, my breath loud in the respirator. The tapping moved. It started near the floor, then zipped up to the ceiling, then across to the far wall where the vanity sat. "Just rats," I whispered. My voice sounded tiny in the vast windowed box. Big, heavy rats. I went back to the stain. I needed to get this done and get out. I pulled up a corner of the carpet to check the subfloor. That's when I saw the first anomaly. Underneath the carpet, the floorboards weren't wood. They were made of the same stained glass as the windows. Deep blues, vibrant reds, and murky greens. And beneath the glass, something was moving. I leaned closer, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust. It looked like water, or maybe some kind of thick fluid, rushing beneath the glass floor. But as I watched, a shape formed. A hand. A pale, many-fingered hand pressed against the underside of the glass from below. It wasn't human. The fingers were too long, with too many knuckles, and the skin was the color of a fish's belly. I scrambled back, knocking over my bucket of rinse water. The hand didn't move. It stayed there, pressed against the glass, right where the body had been. Then, another hand appeared. And another. Soon the entire floor beneath the carpet was lined with them. Dozens of hands. Saw reaching upward, though perfectly still. The tapping started again, louder this time. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from the window I had climbed through. I spun around, my light hitting the glass. The window was gone. Where the frame had been, where the night air had been blowing in just moments ago, there was only solid, ivy-covered wood. No seam, no glass, no escape. I ran to the wall, pounding my fists against the spot where I knew the opening should be. It was hard as stone. I was trapped. I was in a house with no doors, no windows, and a floor made of glass that held something very old and very hungry. I looked back at the center of the room. The bloodstain, one I had just spent an hour scrubbing, was growing. It was bubbling up through the glass floor, seeping through the cracks I hadn't noticed before. And then the wardrobe began to slide. Not like someone was pushing it, but like the floor was tilting. It moved slowly, inches at a time, revealing the wall behind it. I held my breath, hoping, praying for a door. There was no door. But there was something else. Scratched into the wallpaper in jagged, desperate strokes were thousands of lines. Tally marks, covering every square inch of the hidden wall. And at the very bottom, right above the baseboard, a single sentence was carved deep into the wood. It only opens when the Sunday cleaning is done. I looked at my watch. It was Tuesday. I stood in the center of that impossible room, the smell of ozone thick enough to taste. The hands beneath the floor started to twitch. The tapping on the walls turned into a scratching, like 1,000 fingernails raking against silk. I realized then that the mess I was hired to clean wasn't the result of a crime. It was an offering. I reached for my scraper. My hands were shaking, But the procedural brain took over. If the only way out was to finish the job, then I would finish the job. I would scrub until my fingers bled. I would clean every inch of this glass floor till it shone. But as I knelt back down, one of the hands beneath the glass didn't just stay pressed there. It tapped. Tap, tap, tap. It was mimicking my rhythm. I looked at the tally marks on the wall again. There were hundreds of them. If each mark represented a day, someone had been in this box for years. Someone had been cleaning this same stain over and over, waiting for a Sunday that never came. I reached out and touched the glass. It was cold, colder than ice. The hand underneath moved to match mine, palm to palm, finger to finger. It felt like a circuit completing. A surge of static electricity bolted up my arm, throwing me backward. The lights in the room flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, the house began to breathe. A long, slow inhalation that made the walls bulge inward. I fumbled for my backup light, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When the beam finally cut through the black, the room had changed. The bed was gone. The vanity was gone. The room was larger now, the walls stretching away into a darkness my light couldn't penetrate. The only thing left was the glass floor, glowing with a faint, sickly bioluminescence from the things beneath it. And the stain. The stain was no longer a putted on the floor. It was standing up, a tall, thin pillar of dark fluid vibrating with that same ozone hum. It didn't have a face, but I felt it looking at me. It shifted, the liquid roiling, and a voice, or a sound that mimicked a voice, echoed through the space. "You missed a spot," it hissed. I gripped my spray bottle like a weapon. I'm a professional. I've cleaned up after the worst humanity has to offer. But this was the house itself. This was the cleaning that never ended. I realized Miller hadn't sent me here to work. He had sent me here to replace the last guy. The shadow pillar moved toward me, its base dragging across the glass with a sound of wet velvet. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls were gone. The window was gone. There was only the glass, the hands, and the infinite task ahead of me. I looked down at the hand beneath my feet. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was pointing toward a seam in the glass I hadn't seen before, a small circular hatch, no bigger than a dinner plate. "Finish it," the voice hissed again, closer now. I lunged for the hatch. The hatch was cold, sealed tight with a layer of grime that looked like it had been baked on over decades. Behind me, that pillar of dark vibrating fluid loomed, a shadow that felt heavier than the air itself. The ozone smell was sickening now, stinging my eyes and coating my tongue with the taste of a copper penny. I didn't look back. I knew that if I turned around, I'd see whatever face that thing was trying to manifest, and I knew my mind wouldn't survive this sight. I jammed my metal scraper into the seam of the hatch. My knuckles were white, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps inside the respirator. The glass beneath me groaned. The hands, those pale, many-knuckled things, were frantic now, scratching at the underside of the floor like 1,000 trapped birds. They wanted out, or maybe they wanted me in. In this house, there wasn't much of a difference. "Finish the Sunday cleaning," the voice hissed. It wasn't coming from the pillar anymore. It was coming from the walls, the floor, and the very marrow of my bones. With a desperate grunt, I threw my entire weight against the scraper. The hatch popped open with a wet, sucking sound. A blast of freezing, stagnant air hit me, smelling of ancient, wet earth and something much worse, something sweet and rotted, like a forgotten cellar full of spoiled fruit. I didn't hesitate. I slid into the hole. I fell for what felt like seconds, my stomach lurching into my throat, before I slammed into a pile of something soft and rustling. I scrambled to find my flashlight, the beam cutting through a darkness so absolute it felt physical. I wasn't in a basement. I was in a crawl space that shouldn't have existed. The soft pile I'd landed on wasn't insulation, it was clothes. Thousands of pieces of clothing. Work shirts, overalls, scrubs, heavy-duty cleaning jackets, all of them gray, all of them bearing the same logo, pristine transitions. My blood turned to ice. I recognized the names on the stitched patches. Miller, Henderson, Sarah, Mike. These were employees who had retired or moved to other branches over the years. They hadn't left the company. They had been sent here. Miller hadn't just sent me to replace the last guy. He had been sending people here for years to feed the house. I stood up, the clothes crunching beneath my boots. The crawl space was low, barely 4 feet high, forced me into a painful crouch. The walls were made of raw, unpolished stone that wept a thick, black ichor, and everywhere I looked, there were pipes. But they weren't copper or PVC. They were translucent, pulsing with a rhythmic, dull red light. They looked like veins. The house wasn't just a building, it was an organism, and I was inside its gut. I began to crawl, my knees dragging through the discarded lives of my former coworkers. I needed to find a way out, an exit that Miller didn't know about. As I moved, I saw things tucked into the crevices of the stone walls. Keepsakes, a wedding ring, a Polaroid of a golden retriever, a Rodet, crumpled pack of cigarettes. The small, pathetic treasures people cling to when they realize they're never going home. A low, guttural vibration started to shake the floor above me. The cleaning was still happening up there. I could hear the rhythmic scritch-scratch of a brush against glass dots. Someone, or something, was finishing my work. I pushed forward, my flashlight flickering. The crawl space began to narrow, the stone walls closing in until my shoulder were scraping against the weeping rock. The smell of ozone was replaced by the overwhelming stench of a butcher shop. Then, I saw it. A light. It wasn't the moon or a street lamp. It was a pale, flickering blue light coming from around a sharp bend in the crawl space. I scrambled toward it, hope flare up like a match in the dark. I rounded the corner and stopped dead. I was in a chamber. The ceiling rose up, lost in shadows, but the walls were lined with monitor too, hundreds of them. They were old cathode ray tubes, the kind that and heat up the room. Every single screen was showing a different room in the house. I saw the bedroom I had just escaped. It was empty now, the glass floor gleaming, the blood stain gone. I saw a kitchen with no doors, where a man in a tattered, pristine transitions jumpsuit was meticulously polishing a set of silver knives. I saw a bathroom where a woman was scrubbing a bathtub that was overflowing with black hair. And in the center of the chamber, sitting in a high-backed chair made of those same pulsing, vein-like pipes, was Miller. But it wasn't the Miller I knew. His skin was translucent, stretched thin over a frame that looked too large for a human. His eyes were gone, replaced by glowing blue orbs that hummed with the same frequency as the monitors. He didn't turn to look at me, but I knew he saw me. He saw me through every screen in the room. "You're early, Elias," he said. His voice was a discordant layer of a dozen different tones. "The Sunday cleaning isn't for another 5 days. What is this place, Miller?" I shouted, my voice cracking. I gripped my scraper, the only weapon I had. "Why are you doing this?" Miller's head tilted at an impossible angle. "I don't do anything. I am the transition. The house is hungry, Elias. It's a closed system. It requires order. It requires maintenance. People like you, people who know how to erase the stains of the world, you're the only ones it can digest." He gestured to the monitors. "Look at them. They're happy. They have a purpose. In the world outside, they were ghosts. Here, they are essential. They're prisoners." I lunged at him, but an invisible force slammed into my chest, throwing me back against the wall of monitors. Several screens shattered, sparking and dying. "Prisoner? No!" Miller hissed, rising from his chair. He was 7 feet tall, his limbs elongated and twitching. "They are the house. And you, Elias, you were always my favorite. You have a way with the deep stains, the ones that go all the way to the bone. He stepped toward me, his movements jerky, like a film skipping frames. As he moved, the monitors around him began to change. They no longer showed the house, they showed my life. I saw myself as a kid, cleaning my room to avoid my father's temper. I saw my first day at pristine transitions. I saw the face of every dead person I had ever scrubbed off a floor. The house knew me. It had been watching me for 12 years, waiting for the moment I was seasoned enough to be brought in. "There is no exit, Elias," Miller said, his blue eyes flaring. "The house has no doors because it doesn't want anything to leave. It only wants to grow." He reached out a long, pale hand, his fingers twitching. I scrambled to my feet, looking for anything to use. My flashlight beam hit a massive valve on one of the pulsing pipes behind his chair. It was labeled in a language I didn't recognize, but the intent was clear. It was a primary artery. I didn't think. I threw my heavy-duty vacuum unit at Miller's head. It didn't hurt him, but it distracted him for a split second. I dove past him, my boots slipping on the black e-core, and grabbed the valve. It was hot, searing my palms even through my gloves. I twisted with everything I had. The pipe screamed, a high-pitched organic shriek that echoed through the entire house. Miller let out a corresponding how, clutching his chest. "No!" he roared. "The balance!" The pipe burst. Instead of water or gas, a torrent of thick, glowing red fluid sprayed out, drenching the monitors and Miller. The screens began to explode by yen, the rooms they depicted dissolving into static. I heard the screams of the other cleaners echoing through the vents. The house began to convulse. The stone walls of the crawlspace started to soften, turning into something that felt like raw muscle. I was being squeezed, the ceiling dropping lower and lower. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran back toward the pile of clothes. If the house was an organism, I needed to find a way to make it vomit. I reached the pile of jumpsuits and began to dig. I wasn't looking for a way out. I was looking for the chemicals I'd dropped. I found my bag, the industrial-grade enzymes, and a concentrated ammonia. In the world of crime scene cleaning, we have a rule. Never mix bleach and ammonia. It creates chloramine gas. It's lethal. It's a mistake that kills rookie cleaners every year. I took a deep breath, looked up at the ceiling where I knew the glass bedroom was, and I began to mix. The reaction was instant. A thick white cloud of toxic gas began to billow out of my bucket. I clicked my respirator to its highest setting, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I shoved the bucket into one of the ruptured vein pipes, letting the house's own circulatory system carry the poison to every room. The house didn't just scream this time, it buckled. The floor above me shattered. I saw the glass from the bedroom raining down like diamonds. And then the gravity shifted. I was no longer in a crawl space. I was falling upward, sucked through the hole by a massive pressure change. I tumbled back into the bedroom. The shadow pillar was gone. The walls were cracking, revealing not wood or stone, but a void of shifting oily stars. The house was breaking apart, its reality unravel. I saw Miller. He was crawling through the shattered floor, his blue eyes dimming. He reached for my ankle, his grip weak. You've ruined the Sunday." I kicked his hand away and looked for the window. It was back, a jagged, broken frame showing the dark woods and the beautiful, cold fog. I ran for it, but the floor beneath me was dissolving into that black, toothy fluid. The hands were no longer tapping. They were grabbing. Thousands of them, reaching through the broken glass, pulling me down into the gut of the house. I reached the windowsill, my fingers slipping on the ivy. I looked back in last time. The house was folding in on itself, a tesseract of wood and bone. And in the center of the collapse, I saw the faces, not just Miller's, but all of them. Henderson, Sarah, Mike. They weren't screaming anymore. They were smiling, because they knew something I didn't. I hauled myself through the window and fell to the forest floor. I didn't stop to look back. I ran for the van. the sound of the house's collapse sounding like a massive heart stopping. I reached the van, fumbled with my keys, and peeled out of that driveway, the tires screaming on the gravel. I drove until the sun came up, until I was back in the city, surrounded by the comforting noise of traffic and life. I quit my job that morning. I didn't call Miller. I knew he wouldn't answer. For 2 days, I thought I was safe. I thought I had beaten the house. But this morning, I woke up in my apartment. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I reached for the door handle to go to the bathroom. There was no door. I turned around. My front door was gone. My windows were gone. And on my kitchen table, there was a brand new bottle of industrial-grade bleach and a note in Miller's handwriting. The coffee pot hissed, a sharp, mechanical sound that felt like a needle against my eardrums. I stood frozen in the middle of my kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath my bare feet. I had lived in this apartment for 3 years. I knew exactly where the bathroom door was supposed to be, right past the refrigerator, a cheap hollow-core wood door with a brass-plated handle. Now there was only a smooth, unbroken expanse of eggshell white drywall. I spun around to the front door. Nothing. Just more wall, the paint perfectly matched, the baseboards seamless. The windows that overlooked the street, the ones I usually kept the blinds drawn on to hide from the city, were gone too. It was as if they had never existed. My living room was now a white vault, illuminated by a soft, sourceless glow that seemed to bleed out of the ceiling itself. The note on the table fluttered in a draft that shouldn't have been there. I picked it up, my fingers trembling so violently the paper rattled. Miller's handwriting was unmistakable, the sharp, aggressive slants of a man who spent his life filling out death reports. You missed the spot, Elias. The house doesn't like unfinished business. I dropped the note. It didn't fall like paper. It dropped like a stone, hitting the table with a heavy thud. I looked at the bottle of bleach. The label wasn't a brand I recognized. It just said Solvent Zero in block letters. Beside it sat a bucket, a scrub brush with bristles that looked like sharpened bone, and a pair of heavy-duty black gloves that seemed to pulse with a faint, dark light. "I'm not doing it," I whispered. My voice didn't echo. The room swallowed the sound instantly. "I'm not your cleaner anymore, Miller. I broke your house. I killed it." The response was a low, rhythmic vibration beneath my feet. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the kitchen floor. I looked down. The linoleum was beginning to turn translucent. The beige pattern was fading, replaced by the familiar, terrifying sight of stained glass. And beneath the glass, the hands were back. They weren't just pressed against the surface anymore. They were moving in a slow, synchronized wave, like kelp in a dark current. I backed into the living room, tripping over my coffee table. As I fell, I saw the walls of my apartment start to stretch, my bookshelf elongated, the books warping into strange, leather-bound shapes with titles I couldn't read. My television screen flickered to life, but there was no picture, just the scrolling list of names. Thousands of them. I saw mine near the bottom, flashing in a sickly neon green. That the ozone smell returned, 10 times stronger than before. It felt like a physical weight on my chest, forcing me to my knees. I looked back at the kitchen. The bottle of bleach had tipped over. The liquid was spilling out, but it wasn't clear. It was a deep, shimmering violet, and as it touched the floor, the linoleum didn't just stain. It dissolved. That a hole began to open in the center of my kitchen. It wasn't a hole into the apartment below me. It was a vertical tunnel, the walls lined with those same pulsing, vein-like pipes I had teed in the house's crawl space. "Elias." The voice didn't come from the hole. It came from my own mouth, but it wasn't my voice. It was a chorus of the people I had seen on the monitors. Henderson, Sarah, Mike. Their voices were layered over each other, a discordant harmony of the damned. "The Sunday cleaning is eternal, Elias. The house is not a place. It is a debt. And you are the currency." I felt a sharp, searing pain in my right hand. I looked down and screamed. My skin was turning gray. Not the gray of a bruise or a corpse, but the textured industrial gray of a pristine transitions jumpsuit. The fabric was growing out of my pores, weaving itself into my flesh. I grabbed the scrub brush from the table, intending to throw it into the hole, but my hand wouldn't let go. My fingers locked around the bone-like handle. A compulsion, oily and irresistible, flooded my mind. I needed to clean. The mess was everywhere. The world was a stain that needed to be erased. I began to crawl toward the hole, my movements jerky and mechanical. I was no longer in control of my limbs. I was a puppet being reeled in by a master who lived in the architecture of the abyss. I reached the edge of the tunnel and looked down. It went on forever, a throat of stone and light. At the very bottom, miles away, I saw a single glowing blue eye. Miller. He was waiting. As I tipped over the edge, the gravity didn't pull me down. It pulled me through. I emerged into a space that defied every law of physics I knew. It was a cathedral of cleaning supplies. Towering shelves of chemicals reached into a black sky where lightning made of static electricity arced between giant, floating sponges. This was the storage of the house. I landed on a platform made of compressed trash, the discarded remnants of the thousands of specialized contracts the company had fulfilled. Around me, other figures were moving. They were husks of people, their faces smoothed over like wax, their hands replaced by scrapers and mop. They'd moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency, scrubbing the very air until it sparked. One of them stopped and turned to me. It didn't have eyes, but I knew it was Sarah. She had been the best cleaner on the east side before she disappeared 3 years ago. "You shouldn't have broken the valve, Elias," she hissed, the sound coming from a slit where her mouth used to be. The house was hungry. Now it's starving. "I was trying to free you," I shouted, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "Free us?" She let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "We're the only thing keeping the world outside clean. If we stop, the rot spreads, the stains take over. You saw your apartment. You saw how easy it was for the house to move in." She pointed to a massive, throbbing mass in the center of the cathedral. It looked like a heart, but it was made of millions of intertwined mop and brushes. It was black, leaking a thick, tar-like substance that dissolved the platform beneath it. "That is the core," Sarah said. "It's infected. Your poison didn't kill the house. It mutated it. Now, it doesn't just want to be clean, it wants to be pure. And purity requires the total removal of the source." "What source?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Life," she said. The cathedral shook as a massive wet thud echoed from above. The Sunday cleaning had begun on a global scale. I saw images flickering in the static lightning streets and the city being scrubbed away by invisible hands, people being dissolved into violet light as they walked to work, buildings being folded into seamless boxes. The house was expanding. It was no longer satisfied with a single Victorian on the edge of the woods. It was turning the entire world into a house with no doors. I felt the gray fabric of the jumpsuit reach my neck. It was tightening, cutting off my air. The scrub brush in my hand began to vibrate, the bone bristles glowing with a fierce, hungry light. "You are the lead specialist now, Elias," Sarah whispered, her form been defayed into the black ozone. "You're the only head who knows how to handle the deep stains. Go to the core, finish the job, or let the world become a box." I looked at the core. It was beautiful and horrific, a masterpiece of industry and anatomy. I knew what I had to do. I didn't have enzymes or ammonia this time. I only had myself. I began to walk across the floating trash, my gray-clad feet making no sound. The other cleaners stepped aside, their faceless heads bowing in a grotesque display of respect. As I reached the base of the core, the tar-like fluid rose up to meet me. It formed into the shape of Miller, his blue eyes burning like stars. "Welcome home, Elias," he said, his voice a million voices at once. "The Sunday cleaning is finally ready for you." I didn't answer. I stepped into the black fluid, the coldness of it more absolute than any I had ever felt. I felt my skin, my bones, my memories being stripped away, turned into the very bristles of the house's new soul. I reached out and touched the core. The black fluid didn't just consume me, it rewrote me. Every memory of my life, the smell of my mother's kitchen, the sound of my first car's engine, the feeling of rain on my face was being scrubbed away, replaced by the cold, sterile logic of the house. I wasn't Elias anymore. I was a specialized tool. I was the final solution to a world that had grown too messy, too chaotic, too alive. I stood within the core, the pulsing heart of the abyss. From here, I could feel every room in the world. I felt a nursery in London being stripped of its color. I felt a bustling market in Tokyo being folded into a silent, gray cube dot. I felt the very air of the planet being filtered through the house's lungs, removing the scent of soil and sweat, and replacing it with the sharp, biting sting of ozone. It's beautiful, isn't it? Miller's voice echoed within my mind, no longer a sound, but a thought that belonged to both of us. No more decay, no more entropy, a world that stays exactly as it is, forever. But even as the house expanded, I felt the rot I'd introduced, poison of my own humanity, festering at the center. The core was shivering, the black fluid was boiling, reacting to the stubborn, irrational part of me that refused to be erased. I realized that the house couldn't handle a stain that didn't want to be cleaned. I reached deep into the center of the pulsing mass, past the mop and the bone brushes, until I felt something solid. It was the valve I had broken in the Victorian house. It had followed me here, a physical manifestation of my defiance. It was jagged, glowing with a sickly, dying light. "You'll have to finish it, Elias," a voice whispered. It wasn't Sarah or Miller. It was the sound of the wind through the trees outside that first house. It was the sound of life. I gripped the jagged valve, the house, screamed, a sound that vibrated through every sealed room and doorless hallway on Earth. The black fluid tried to pull my arm away, the hands of 1,000 former cleaners rising from the sludge to restrain me. They weren't smiling anymore. They were terrified. "If you turn that," Miller hissed, his blue eyes appearing inches from mine, "there is no world to go back to. You've already erased too much. You'll be standing in a void." "I'd rather be in a void than in a box," I snarled. I twisted the valve. The core didn't explode. It imploded. The entire cathedral of supplies, the endless shelves of chemicals, and the floating trash of a million lives began to collapse into a single, infinitesimal point. I felt myself being stretched, my gray jumpsuit tearing away, my skin returning in painful sting patches. The ozone smell vanished for a second. There was only silence. Absolute, crushing silence. And then, the sound of a door opening. I fell. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. I smelled damp earth. I smelled pine needles. I smelled the heavy, metallic scent of a coming storm. I opened my eyes and saw the moon, pale and indifferent, hanging over the tree line. I was back at the Blackwood Residence. The Victorian house stood before me, but it was changed. It wasn't a skeletal ruin anymore. It was just an old house, a beautiful weathered home with a wide front porch and a heavy oak door that stood slightly ajar. I looked at my hands. They were stained with dirt and grease, but they were mine. The gray fabric was gone. I was wearing my old work flannels, torn and smelling of wood smoke. I stood up, my legs shaking, and looked around. The forest was real. The fog was just water vapor, not a physical weight. I walked toward the house, my heart hammering. I needed to know if it was over. I stepped onto the porch. The wood didn't vibrate. It didn't groan with a hidden hunger. I pushed the front door open. Inside, the house was empty. No furniture, no lace doilies, no crystal chandeliers. Just bare floorboards and peeling wallpaper. I walked to the center of the room where the glass floor had been. It was gone. In its place was solid, sturdy oak. There were no hands, no tapping. I walked to the back of the house, looking for the stairs. I found them, leading up to the second floor. I climbed, my boots echoing in the empty space. I reached the bedroom. The box. It wasn't the box. There were two large windows that let in the moonlight, and a door that led to a small, dusty bathroom. The tally marks were gone. The sentence about the Sunday cleaning was gone. I leaned against the wall, a sob breaking in my chest. I had done it. I had broken the cycle. I walked back down the stairs and out onto the porch, ready to find my van and leave this place forever. But as I reached the bottom step, I stopped. My van was gone. In its place sat a black sedan I didn't recognize, and standing next to it was a man in a crisp, dark suit. He was holding a clipboard. "Elias?" the man asked. His voice was professional, polite. "Who are you?" I asked, my hand instinctively reaching for a scraper that was no longer there. "I'm from the insurance adjusters," he said, stepping into the moonlight. It wasn't Miller. He was a younger man, with tired eyes and a kind smile. "We heard there was some unauthorized maintenance done on this property. We're here to assess the restoration." He looked at the house, then back at me. "You did a hell of a job, Elias. Most people who come out here don't manage to get the deep stains out. You've made it look like nothing ever happened." "I'm done," I said, my voice firm. "I don't work for pristine transitions anymore. I don't work for anyone." The man nodded, making a note on his clipboard. "Of course, that's the standard procedure after a specialized contract. You've earned your retirement." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He tossed them to me. "The sedan is yours. It's part of the severance package. There's a GPS already programmed with your new address. It's a quiet place. No neighbors for miles." I caught the keys. They felt heavy, real. "What about the others? Miller? Sarah?" The man's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "There is no Miller, Elias. There is no Sarah. There is only the house, and the house is very pleased with your work." He turned and began to walk into the woods, his form dissolving into the shadows before he was even 10 feet away. I stood there for a long time, the keys biting into my palm. I looked at the black sedan. I looked at the old Victorian house. Then I walked to the car and got in. The GPS screen flickered to life. That didn't show a map. It showed a single line of text in a font I knew all too well. Rest period 6 days. Monday cleaning begins at dawn. I looked at the rearview mirror. My eyes weren't brown anymore. They were a pale, humming blue. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just put the car in gear and drove. Because a cleaner's work is never truly done. The world is a messy place, and someone has to keep the stains from reaching the bone. As the house vanished in my mirrors, I realized the ultimate truth of the job. You don't escape the house. You just become the reason the next person needs a door. I reached for the radio, hoping for music, for news, for anything human. But all that came through the speakers was the rhythmic, steady sound of a brush against glass. Tap, tap, tap. I smiled, and the blue light in my eyes filled the cabin. "I missed a spot," I whispered.